August 25th, 1944. General George S. Patton's Third Army had covered 400 miles in 3 weeks. His tanks were racing south of Paris, cutting off German retreat routes. The German army in Western Europe was effectively destroyed. Between Patton's forces and the German border stood nothing. German units were abandoning equipment and fleeing east toward the Rhine River. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge reported to Hitler that the Wehrmacht in France was finished. Then a phone call from Paris stopped everything. Not German resistance, not supply problems. A political demand from a French general who commanded no American troops and controlled no American fuel. Charles de Gaulle was about to buy Germany the time it desperately needed. 6 weeks earlier, American forces had been stuck in the Normandy hedgerows. Every field was a fortress. Every hedge was a defensive line. The advance toward Paris had stalled in brutal close combat. On July 25th, Operation Cobra shattered German lines at St. Lo. General Omar Bradley's First Army broke through. Patton's Third Army became operational on August 1st and immediately exploited the gap. Patton's armor was moving so fast that forward air controllers couldn't keep track of the front line. Tank commanders were driving off the maps issued to them. Units were advancing 30 miles per day through gaps the Germans couldn't close. By mid-August, German commanders reported they had no way to stop the American advance. The question wasn't whether the Allies would reach Germany. The question was when. Patton's advance was creating a logistical nightmare. Third Army was consuming 400,000 gallons of fuel per day. Supply lines stretched back 400 miles to Normandy beaches. The Red Ball Express was running trucks 24 hours a day. Drivers pushed through exhaustion to keep Patton's tanks moving. But even maximum effort couldn't match Patton's speed. By August 20th, Third Army was running low on fuel. Patton ordered his commanders to keep advancing until tanks literally ran dry. He believed momentum mattered more than caution. His gamble was working. German forces in France were disintegrating. Paris was within reach. Beyond Paris lay open country all the way to the German frontier. One tank commander in the 4th Armored Division wrote home that they could smell the panic on the retreating Germans. The men were running on adrenaline and caffeine, believing they would be sleeping in Berlin by Christmas. They didn't care about fatigue. They cared about finishing it. And then Charles de Gaulle intervened. While Allied commanders argued about Paris, Field Marshal Walter Model was performing a miracle. Hitler had sent him west on August 17th with orders to save what remained of the German army. Model found chaos. Units were scattered across France. Command structure had collapsed. The situation looked hopeless. But Model noticed something that gave him hope. The American advance was slowing, not because German resistance was stiffening, because the Americans were stopping on their own. Model's chief of staff reported that American forces approaching Paris had halted their advance. They weren't attacking. They were waiting for something. Model ordered immediate action. Pull every surviving unit back toward Germany. Establish defensive positions along the Moselle River. Man the Siegfried Line fortifications that had been stripped of heavy guns and left with skeleton crews. Use every day the Americans gave them. German commanders couldn't believe their luck. 1 week earlier, they had been fleeing in panic. Now they had time to reorganize, time to establish new defensive lines, time to prepare for the battles that would cost tens of thousands of American lives. Model's chief logistics officer later testified that the week between August 20th and August 27th saved German forces from complete destruction. Charles de Gaulle had been waiting 4 years for this moment. Paris was the symbol of France. Its liberation would define who controlled France's future. And de Gaulle was determined that French forces would enter Paris first. On August 21st, de Gaulle met with Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower. His message was blunt. French forces must liberate Paris. Not American, not British, French. Eisenhower explained the military situation. Patton was positioned to cut off German escape routes. American forces could secure Paris within days. There was no military reason to delay. De Gaulle didn't care about military reasons. He cared about political reality. France had been occupied for 4 years. The French people needed to see French soldiers liberating their capital. The Paris resistance had already risen up on August 19th. They were dying in the streets. Then de Gaulle made his threat. If Eisenhower didn't allow French forces to liberate Paris, de Gaulle would order the French 2nd Armored Division to enter the city anyway. He would break the Allied chain of command. Either way, the advance toward Germany would stop. Eisenhower had been in this position before. Military logic versus political necessity. Battlefield efficiency versus coalition unity. He knew what Washington wanted. Keep the alliance together, keep de Gaulle happy. Eisenhower called Bradley and explained the situation. De Gaulle was demanding that French forces enter Paris first. This meant stopping the American advance and diverting resources to support the French 2nd Armored Division. There was another factor. Inside Paris, German commander Dietrich von Choltitz had orders from Hitler to destroy the city. Bridges were rigged with explosives, monuments prepared for demolition. If the uprising continued without Allied support, Hitler wanted Paris reduced to rubble. Bradley protested. His armies were on the verge of breaking into Germany. Every day of delay allowed the Germans to regroup. Paris could be liberated after the war was won. Eisenhower knew Bradley was right from a military standpoint, but he also knew President Roosevelt's priorities. The French alliance mattered. De Gaulle's cooperation would be necessary for governing liberated France. Offending him now would create political problems for months. Eisenhower made his decision. The French 2nd Armored Division, under General Philippe Leclerc, would liberate Paris. American forces would support the operation, but remain outside the city. The advance toward Germany would pause for at least a week. Bradley passed the order to Patton. Third Army would halt its advance. Fuel and supplies would be diverted to support the Paris operation. The race to Germany was over. Patton was furious. He had momentum. He had an open road, and now he was being stopped so French forces could have a parade in Paris. On August 25th, French forces entered Paris. Leclerc's division rolled down the Champs-Élysées. Crowds filled the streets. Church bells rang across the city. Charles de Gaulle stood in Notre Dame Cathedral and declared France liberated. The images were broadcast worldwide. The political victory was complete. What the photographs didn't show was the cost. While champagne corks popped in Paris, Patton's tanks sat silent on the side of roads east of the city. Fuel that could have taken Third Army to the German border was being consumed in Paris. The Red Ball Express diverted thousands of tons of supplies to support the Paris operation. French forces needed ammunition, food, and fuel. Paris itself required 4,000 tons of supplies per day just to keep the population alive. Food, coal, medicine. Every truck carrying supplies to Paris was a truck not carrying ammunition to the front. Eyewitnesses described GIs at the front, watching American trucks drive away from them, back toward Paris, loaded with jerry cans of gasoline for the parade. Men who had fought across France were left sitting on their helmets in the mud, polishing their rifles, while the fuel they needed to end the war was burned in victory laps 100 miles behind them. Patton's supply officers calculated the cost. Supporting the Paris liberation consumed enough fuel to move Third Army 100 miles closer to Germany. That would have put American forces across the Moselle River before German defenses solidified. But military efficiency wasn't the priority. Political symbolism was, and the Germans were paying attention. When Patton's tanks finally lurched forward on August 28th, the difference was immediate. The rabbit hunt was over. Instead of fleeing columns, American vanguards ran into walls of anti-tank fire. The Moselle River, which could have been crossed in pontoon boats a week earlier, was bristling with artillery. Third Army's intelligence officers reported that units that had been fleeing in disorder a week earlier were now fighting from prepared positions along the Siegfried Line. The week of delay had allowed the Germans to transform chaos into organized defense. By early September, Third Army faced a fuel crisis. The Red Ball Express couldn't keep up with demand after the Paris diversion. Patton's tanks were running dry just as they approached the German frontier. In the first days of September, Patton received orders to halt Third Army's advance indefinitely. Fuel priority was being given to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's operations in Belgium. The race to Germany was over. Patton's forces sat 100 miles from the Rhine River with empty fuel tanks. German forces used September to man the Siegfried Line with fresh divisions brought from Germany. The opportunity to end the war in 1944 disappeared. Third Army wouldn't resume major offensive operations until November. By then, German defenses were fully prepared. The easy advance through France became a grinding battle through fortified positions. In September, the American advance slammed into the concrete teeth of the Siegfried Line. Soldiers found themselves fighting for pillboxes that controlled every angle of approach. The battles turned into a meat grinder. The battles cost tens of thousands of American casualties. Units that could have walked into Germany in August were now fighting for every 100 yards of ground. The war that could have ended in 1944 dragged into 1945. German generals interviewed after the war confirmed what Patton had known. The pause at Paris gave Germany the week it needed. Field Marshal von Rundstedt stated that without that delay, German forces couldn't have established defensive positions in time. The weather turned. The bright summer days of the race across France disappeared. In their place came the freezing rain and mud of autumn, and eventually the snows of the Ardennes. The soldiers who should have been home were now shivering in foxholes, waiting for an enemy that had been beaten 3 months ago. The delay at Paris ensured the war would not end in 1944. The battles for the Siegfried Line dragged through autumn. American forces ground forward at terrible cost. The quick victory that seemed certain in August became a winter campaign. On December 16th, 1944, Germany launched the Battle of the Bulge. The offensive used divisions that Model had reorganized during the critical week in August. It bought Hitler the winter he desperately needed. American casualties exceeded 80,000. Charles de Gaulle got his political victory in Paris. The images of French liberation defined France's post-war narrative. Eisenhower preserved the alliance, and thousands of Americans paid the price for that political decision in the snow of the Ardennes.